If you've been around economists long enough, you've probably heard a zillion times how the minimum wage is not only bad economic policy, but is immoral. And it's based on simple, elegant models that libertarian economists are known for. Here's the labor market. The demand for labor is what companies are willing to hire at what wages. As wages go down, companies are willing to hire more workers, which makes sense. The supply of labor, meaning people who work, goes up as wages go up, which also makes sense. The fact that companies want to pay less and workers want more wages results in them jostling until a market-wide equilibrium is met. In this pretend model, that equilibrium is 6,000 workers working at $7 per hour. This is a total outlay of $42,000 per hour. Now let's say Congress enacts a minimum wage law, which functions the same way as the price floor at $9 per hour. We can see that wages went up to $9 an hour, but companies are now only willing to hire 4,000 workers. This results in a total outlay of $36,000 per hour, which is 6,000 less than if the government had just left things alone. Plus, you are now employing 2,000 less people than at equilibrium, 4,000 instead of 6,000 as seen before. Now, libertarian economists will try to pull a fast one on here and say that 4,000 people are made unemployed because more people are looking for jobs at $9 an hour. But 2,000 of those unemployed people wouldn't have been looking for a job anyway. So while they show up as unemployed in the statistics, that is misleading because they never would have been looking for jobs in the first place if a minimum wage hadn't been enacted. But on the whole, it looks like the minimum wage is a terrible idea. At least that's where this simplistic analysis would lead. In the real world, the demand for labor can be inelastic. This means that a company absolutely positively must have its workers, and raising wages won't make companies in this market shed off jobs as fast as in the previous example. So here in this inelastic market, we have labor demand and labor supply at an equilibrium of 8,000 workers working at $7 an hour. This would result in a total outlay of $56,000 an hour. But if we were to impose a minimum wage at $9 an hour, companies in this market would only hire 7,000 workers, but comes out to a total outlay of $63,000 per hour. So the total outlay would be higher if a minimum wage was imposed, but you would be hiring 1,000 less workers than if you left the market alone. Again, libertarian economists will try to fool you into thinking that the unemployment is the length of the horizontal red line between the demand and the supply curve, when really it's only the distance between where the red lines cross and where the black lines cross. And that distance we know is 1,000 workers. Alright, this part is going to be a bit more complex. The green curve is marginal revenue product, which shows how much a company earns from each additional unit of labor, each person being a unit of labor. The blue line is labor supply, and as you can see, as wages go up, more people are willing to work. However, in order to get more workers, a company must raise wages, and that means it must raise the wages for everyone. This means that hiring additional workers has a marginal cost, which is the red line. And this additional cost will eventually be greater than the value of that worker's labor. So as a company hires more and more workers, the marginal revenue product will go down, and the marginal cost for hiring each new worker will go up because you have more and more workers to raise the wages of. A company will stop hiring workers once this marginal cost exceeds the value of that labor, or marginal revenue product, the green line. This is what happens in a monopsony, where there is one company but many workers, and so the company is a price maker, not a price taker. And this is what happens if the market is left to itself, if a monopsonistic labor market is left to itself. Low employment and low wages. This is because a firm won't raise wages past the marginal cost, and as a result is left employing only the few people who are willing to work for very little. However, when a minimum wage is imposed, a company in this situation will actually hire more workers because more workers are willing to work at this new higher wage, the minimum wage. The company might as well hire all these new workers who want to work at the minimum wage because it's forced by law to pay the minimum wage anyway. So by imposing the minimum wage in this situation, you are actually raising wages, raising employment, and raising total outlays. And here you can see what happens when you raise the minimum wage to where labor supply meets marginal revenue product, and to when it's raised above that, you can see a company actually goes back to hiring less workers. So these are two situations where a minimum wage makes sense. One, where demand for labor is inelastic, and two, where the labor market is monopsonistic. Or, in plain English, one is where when a company absolutely, positively must have its labor, you should impose a minimum wage. And two, also when the labor-firm ratio is so imbalanced that a company can get away with paying its worker peanuts, then a minimum wage should also be imposed. That's the monopsonistic example. So don't let these right-wing economists browbeat you into thinking that the minimum wage is some emotional pipe dream. Their denunciation of it is based on simplistic models that ignore the very situations where one would desire to implement the minimum wage anyway.